The girl hadn't spoken a word since the day her mother died, not when they locked her in a barn, not when they dragged her to the trading post, and not when the bidding started at $1. She stood barefoot, eyes fixed on nothing, wearing a coat too large for her small frame and a bruise still purple on her jaw. The townsfolk whispered, "She's simple, not worth much." $2 was all it took, but just as the auctioneer struck the deal, a voice rasped from the edge of the crowd. It belonged to a dying man slouched on a broken Mustang, half shadowed by dusk and dust. His chest heaved with each breath, and his eyes locked on the girl. "She's mine," he said, before passing out cold in the saddle. No one knew his name. No one questioned him. But the girl, for the first time in months, followed. They called her the Mute before they even knew her name. She stood near the cattle pens at Whip's Hollow trading post, a dust-crusted girl in a coat too large and boots too worn. She couldn't have been more than 16, but there was something about her stillness, like a stray dog that had learned the cost of making noise. Her chin was bruised, a thin gash cut across her temple, and she hadn't spoken since the fire. The townsfolk whispered behind cracked lips, "She don't talk, don't cry. Maybe she don't feel nothing neither." No one asked where she came from. They only asked what she was worth. The sheriff, big-shouldered, sunburned, and missing 2 teeth, scratched his beard and raised a hand. $1, he called, nodding toward the silent girl standing against the corral fence. She didn't look up. "She eats little, works hard, don't make a peep. Startin' bid's $1. Hell, that's a steal." No one moved at first. Then a rancher chuckled and raised a coin. "1. Do I hear 2? The sheriff grinned. Another voice laughed. "Only if she comes with a mouth." "She don't," the sheriff said. $2? The crowd shifted. Someone spat. The girl stared at her own hands, thumbs pressed together, like a prayer with no God listening. Then, hoofbeats. Slow and broken. A pale Mustang limped through the dust. Its rider slumped low in the saddle. He looked half dead, skin gone gray beneath weeks of road and ruin. The outlaw didn't speak, didn't even blink, just rode until he was close enough to be heard breathing. And then, without lifting his head, he said 2 words. "She's mine." The sheriff lowered his hat against the sun. "What's that now?" The outlaw pulled a rusted silver coin from his coat, let it drop into the dirt. $2, someone whispered. The sheriff's mouth opened, then shut. A few men laughed nervously. The girl turned. She hadn't moved in minutes, but now her feet stepped through the gravel without hesitation. She walked straight to the outlaw's horse, looked up at his hollow eyes, and placed her hand gently against his leg. He collapsed, fell out the saddle like a sack of bones. No one caught him. No one dared touch him. But the girl stood there, waiting. The sun dropped low as the Mustang limped up the hill trail, hooves clinking over stones. Nessa Ray rode behind the dying outlaw, her arms wrapped gently around his waist. He hadn't stirred since the auction, just moaned once when she lifted him into the saddle, blood soaking through his shirt where a bandage had long given up. She didn't know his name, didn't need it yet. He'd pointed weakly toward the east when she tugged his coat, and she followed the trail like it meant something. The road was empty, except for memory. Every mile brought flashes, her mama's scarf blowing from a wagon wheel, the red sky the day the fire took everything. The last time her throat had worked. She'd screamed once, just once. Since then, she let the world speak without her. They passed through an abandoned settlement. A shutter banged in the wind. A broken cradle sat in the dirt. Still, he said nothing. She guided the horse when his head slumped forward, steadying the reins with small hands. His breath rattled. His body shook. They reached a rusted boxcar wedged between 2 boulders at the base of a bluff. The outlaw raised one trembling finger. Nessa slid down, opened the door, and helped him inside. It smelled of old blood and whiskey. Inside were cracked crates, a wool blanket, and a rifle leaning against a whiskey barrel. The place wasn't a home, it was a hiding place. He collapsed onto the floor and coughed something dark into a cloth. Nessa knelt beside him, pulled the coat from his back. A bullet scar crossed his ribs. Another wound near his hip looked red and angry. She cleaned it with water from a dented canteen. He groaned once but didn't open his eyes. As the moon rose, she found a tin box under the floorboard. Inside, cartridges, a pocket knife, and a folded piece of paper. A wanted poster. Her breath caught. His name, Declan Vore. Reward, dead preferred. Alias, the Butcher of Dust Run. She stared at the drawing, hollow eyes, the same jawline, same coat. The outlaw lying behind her was worth more dead than she'd ever been alive. Still, she didn't run. Instead, she curled up by the door, eyes half on the man, half on the moon. He'd claimed her, with no words. She'd follow, for now, with none of her own. Morning filtered through gaps in the boxcar wall, casting thin gold lines across the dusty floor. Declan hadn't moved much in the night. His breathing was shallow but steady now. Nessa Ray sat cross-legged nearby, watching the sunrise, a shard of charcoal in her fingers. She'd used it to sketch symbols in the dirt, marks only she could read. A tree, a falling star, a small hand reaching toward a larger one. He stirred, eyes cracking open. They met hers for a moment. No words passed. She handed him the canteen. He drank slow, eyes on her the whole time. When he tried to rise, his body buckled, and she caught his weight without flinching. The outlaw blinked like that surprised him more than the fever. Later, he opened an old rucksack and pulled out a torn leather journal. He pushed it toward her. Inside, most of the pages were filled with uneven handwriting, crooked lines that told of distant towns, wronged friends, and burned bridges. On the back page was a message scratched in red ink. If I die before this ends, she gets the name. She looked up. He gestured for her to write. Instead, she shook her head and took the charcoal. She drew a bird in flight. Declan leaned back, wheezing, and gave a dry little laugh. The first sound like warmth she'd heard from him. He tapped his chest, then drew a slow cross in the air. She understood. He'd buried someone. She motioned to the floor. Here, he rasped. She hesitated, then carefully peeled back a loose plank. Beneath it, wrapped in cloth, was a single photograph. A woman holding a child. Both had the same eyes as Nessa. The woman's face was smudged with age, but the girl, she looked like the ghost of Nessa's own reflection. He didn't explain. Didn't have to. That night, she lit a small oil lamp and sat beside him while he slept, carving letters into the floorboard above his journal. Her name, Nessa, next to a crude drawing of his boot. The pact wasn't made in blood or words. It was made in silence. She wasn't his, he wasn't hers, but something unspoken had passed between them, a deal older than trust. The first rider came just after sundown. Nessa heard the crunch of hooves long before she saw the glint of a rifle barrel through the mesquite. She slipped from the boxcar and crawled under the low bluff nearby, pressing herself into the shadows like she'd learned in the burned-out fields back home. Two men approached slowly. Lean men, one with a long scar across his scalp, the other missing 3 fingers. They weren't townsfolk. They rode like they knew the weight of wanted men, like Declan. Inside the boxcar, Declan pulled himself up, chest heaving, blood soaking through his side. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't hide. He simply stood in the open doorway, coughing into his sleeve. Vore, the scarred one said. You weren't supposed to last this long. Declan said nothing. She yours? The other asked, nodding toward the path where Nessa had vanished. Declan paused, then nodded. My blood, he rasped. They exchanged a look. Ain't heard you had a daughter. He held their gaze, didn't blink. After a beat, they laughed. Hell, guess you're just full of secrets. The scarred one reached for a canteen, tossed it over. You'll die up here, Vore, but we ain't gonna be the ones to do it. Not yet. When they rode off, the desert swallowed their sound like a held breath. Nessa crept back in, eyes wide. Declan sat slowly, clutching his ribs, his jaw clenched as he looked at her. "I lied," he muttered. She nodded. "I ain't your blood." She stepped forward, touched his wrist, then picked up the charcoal again. On the boxcar wall, she drew two figures, one tall, one small, both shadowed by a crooked sun. Between them, she drew a crooked X, her way of saying, not blood, but chosen. The next day, she dug a narrow hole just outside the boxcar and buried the wanted poster. Above it, she hammered a wooden sign into the dirt. She carved a single word on it: no. Not for sale, not for trade, not for anyone else again. Declan wouldn't have made the ride alone. His fever had broken, but his strength hadn't returned. Still, he insisted they ride back to Whip's Hollow. Nessa Ray didn't ask why. She just packed the saddlebag and helped him mount. She rode double behind him again, arms around his ribs, her face close enough to hear every strained breath. She could feel it deep in his chest. Whatever was keeping him alive was burning out fast. The trading post shimmered in the heat haze as they approached. Folks stopped what they were doing, mouths parted in disbelief. The mute girl had returned, and she wasn't alone. The sheriff came out of the saloon, chewing tobacco slow, squinting against the sun. "Well, I'll be... Thought you died in a ditch, Vor." Declan dismounted, like every bone hurt. Said nothing. The sheriff's gaze drifted to Nessa. "She still don't talk?" Nessa stepped forward. She didn't speak, but she didn't flinch either. Declan pulled something from his coat. Not a weapon. A photograph. He tossed it toward the sheriff's feet. A girl. 7 years old. Eyes like Nessa's. Smiling beside a woman in front of a church somewhere green. On the back, scrawled in ink, Marin before it all. The sheriff's face changed. Declan didn't explain. He just stood there, swaying slightly in the heat, daring the sheriff to move. The man who'd paid $2 stepped out from the feed store, bloated, red-faced, drunk even in daylight. "That girl's mine," he shouted. "Bought her fair." Declan finally turned. His hand hovered near his sidearm. The man fell silent. Nessa didn't blink. She reached into Declan's coat and pulled out the journal, stepped forward, opened it to a marked page, written in his uneven hand. She was sold, but never owned. A hush rolled over the street like a dust storm held its breath. The sheriff bent, picked up the photograph, and stared at it for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "Ain't our business anymore." The drunk started forward, but the sheriff blocked him. Nessa turned, walked back to Declan, helped him onto the horse. They left the town behind in silence. But the weight of what had passed would echo longer than words. The saloon doors swung shut behind Declan with a soft groan. The place hadn't changed. Same stink of sweat and old ale, same yellow cards stuck to the walls, same crooked piano with 2 dead keys. Only now every pair of eyes in the room followed him like he was a ghost stepped out of a grave. At a corner table, the auctioneer sat alone, stirring a tin cup with shaking fingers. His name was Cal Rooney, round, soft-jawed, and once meaner than a snake in a sack. Now his hair was half gone, and he flinched when Declan pulled out a chair without a word. "You ain't supposed to be walking, boar," Cal muttered. Declan didn't reply. He laid a silver revolver on the table. Cal stared at it. "What, you want me to use that, or die by it?" Declan slid a torn page from his journal across the table. Oh, it was an old ledger, one Cal had signed a decade ago. The name at the top, Marin Vor. Sale amount, none. Reason, unclaimed family property. Cal's breath caught. "That was a long time ago." Declan tapped the page once, then nodded toward the door. "She was just a girl, Vor." Cal swallowed. "Like that mute kid of yours." Declan's eyes narrowed. "She worth all this?" Cal hissed. "You're dying. This your last ride? Over her?" Declan leaned forward, his lips parted, barely a whisper. "One good thing," he said. "That's all I want." He stood, left the gun behind. Cal didn't touch it. Outside, Nessa waited near the horse. Her eyes searched his, asking the question she couldn't voice. He simply shook his head. No blood spilled. Not today. But he staggered as he walked. The saloon door behind him stayed closed, like it feared the weight of old debts. That night, they camped on the edge of town. Nessa found a tin box buried behind a sycamore tree near the edge of an old trail. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written by Declan. None sent, all addressed to Marin. The last one wasn't finished. She read it anyway. I should have stopped them. I should have burned the whole damn town to the ground. But I found a girl today who doesn't speak. And maybe that's a gift. Maybe some things don't need words to be healed. Nessa folded the letter, held it to her chest. She didn't need to speak to tell him what she felt, but she'd find a way to say it. Before the end. Morning came like ash drifting through smoke. Declan couldn't stand on his own anymore, but he still tried. Nessa helped him into the saddle, her hands shaking as she tied his bedroll tighter than needed. The trail back into Whip's Hollow was quieter this time. No one laughed when they passed, no one spat. The townsfolk only watched. They rode straight to the livery barn behind the old chapel. Declan slid from the horse with a grunt, nearly fell. Nessa caught him beneath the arms. He winced, but nodded once. He was ready. The sheriff stepped out from the stables, holding a folded sheet of paper. Judge wired this in, he said. Says the girl's got no guardian, makes her fair property. Couple folks already claimed rights on her. Declan didn't take the paper. Instead, he handed over a leather pouch. Inside was his last coin, an assigned land claim. Gave her a name, he rasped. Gave her ground. She's still not yours. Declan coughed blood. Never said she was. Said she belonged to me. He fell then, hard. Nessa dropped to her knees beside him, hands scrambling to hold the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. Her eyes locked on the sheriff, wide and pleading. The other man, the same one who tried to reclaim her for $2, stepped forward. She ain't got no rights. She don't even talk. She's nothing. And something inside her broke. Nessa stood, fists clenched. Her throat tightened until it hurt. And then, against the silence that had owned her for months, she screamed. One sharp, broken word, a name. Declan! It echoed through the barn like thunder off canyon walls. The sheriff stepped back. The man stumbled. Declan, even through the haze of death, opened his eyes for one last moment and smiled. Nessa knelt again, pulled his coat around him, held his face as the breath left slow. There were no last words, but there didn't need to be. She'd spoken enough for the both of them. Weeks passed. The wind carried less dust now. Rain had come twice since the funeral, washing the roads clean and soaking the hills where Nessa Ray now lived. Alone, but not forgotten. She stayed in the boxcar tucked beneath the bluff, repaired the roof, mended the walls, grew herbs in cans. Every morning she walked to the grave under the sycamore and placed a small stone atop the pile. She never missed a day. The headstone wasn't carved from marble, just old barnwood shaped with her own hands. She'd burned the letters in slow, careful strokes. Declan Vore. He bought her life with his own. No one came to claim the land. The sheriff never returned. Cal Rooney sent her a crate of canned peaches and a letter he hadn't signed. She never read it, but she kept the tin box of Declan's unsent letters tied with twine beneath her pillow. Sometimes, when the night was still and the oil lamp flickered low, she'd take out the journal. Not to read his words, but to write her own. Her voice hadn't returned fully, but her hand had found a way to speak. She wrote about the day she screamed, about how it felt to be chosen, about how silence had protected her, but his silence had saved her. And when a stranger's wagon once rattled up the bluff, an older girl, limping and scared, Nessa had opened the boxcar door without question. She gave her food, a blanket, a name she could borrow until she found her own. And so the legend began, of the mute girl who once sold for $2, but was never owned again. Whip's Hollow still whispered about the outlaw with a hollow stare who'd claimed her like a daughter. Some said he was mad. Others said he'd seen his own ghost in her eyes. But all agreed on one thing. Whatever he saw was worth dying for. And what she became, that was something no coin could ever buy.